The operating room is eerily quiet as the monitors beep sporadically, each passing second feeling heavier than the last. The tension is palpable. Dr. Stephen Harris, the leading surgeon, wipes the sweat from his brow, his once steady hands now trembling ever so slightly. He looks to his colleagues, a silent conversation passing between them. Richard Ford, lying motionless on the table, is a man whose life has been defined by success and arrogance, yet now none of that matters. His wealth, his power, are meaningless in the face of death. The doctors exchange glances, their expressions telling the grim story: it's over. They've exhausted every option. Dr. Harris speaks softly, almost as if speaking to himself. We've done all we can. His heart won't last much longer. The words hang in the air like a death sentence. Dr. Maria Gomez, the assistant, watches from the side, her face etched with concern. She's a skilled doctor, but even she knows when a situation is beyond saving. Still, a nagging feeling creeps up in her mind. Something isn't right, but what is it? Her eyes linger on Richard's pale face, hoping for a sign, any sign that he might somehow defy the odds. Yet, the room is filled with resignation, the cold reality of their limitations settling in. Richard Ford's life flashes before his eyes, though no one in the room knows it. The man who built an empire on ruthless ambition is now a mere shadow of himself. His body, once the symbol of vitality and control, lies limp on the operating table, a casualty of his own arrogance. His mind, ever sharp, struggles to keep up with the chaos around him. For the first time in his life, he feels helpless, stripped of all the wealth and influence he once held so dearly. He can't escape the cold, sterile room or the growing sense of helplessness. And yet, in the quiet of his panic, he wonders, is this how it ends? The monitors continue to beep, growing fainter with each passing second. Dr. Harris leans over Richard's chest, his movements deliberate but slow, as if unwilling to accept the inevitable. We need to prepare for the worst, he says, his voice heavy with the weight of a decision he's reluctant to make. Dr. Gomez steps forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Should we call it? Should we let him go? But Dr. Harris doesn't answer right away. He simply nods, too tired to argue. This is the point where even the best doctors must admit defeat. Richard Ford, for all his power, is no different from any other patient who slips through their fingers. As the seconds tick by, the team is frozen in place, each doctor processing the situation in their own way. Dr. Harris, the experienced chief surgeon, starts to back away, signaling the end of the procedure. His mind races, wondering what went wrong. How did they get to this point? He had trusted his knowledge, his skills, but it's clear now that there's nothing more they can do. His gaze lingers on Richard's still form, his heart heavy with the weight of failure. The thought lingers in his mind: how many more lives will he lose before he finds the answers? The loss feels like a personal defeat, even though he knows it's not. Dr. Gomez, however, doesn't move. She stands in silence, her eyes never leaving Richard. There's something gnawing at her, a deep-rooted feeling that tells her this isn't the end. She can't explain it. She doesn't have the medical experience to back it up, but her intuition refuses to let go. She knows the risks of going against protocol, but she also knows the cost of doing nothing. The silence in the room is deafening, and she suddenly feels more isolated than ever. Is it wrong to believe that somehow, in the midst of all this, there might be a chance? She takes a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Richard Ford's face is devoid of expression, his eyes closed in peaceful surrender. But in the depths of his mind, he fights to hold on, unable to accept that this is the end. He hasn't lived his life this way. He was always the one in control, the one making decisions, dictating the future. But now, lying here, he's powerless, trapped in a world where no amount of money can buy him more time. The irony isn't lost on him. A man who had everything now finds himself with nothing, no business to manage, no deals to close, and no time to fight for his life. As the tension builds, the camera zooms in on Dr. Harris. His eyes, once filled with confidence, now reflect uncertainty and regret. He turns to Dr. Gomez, his voice tight with resignation. "There's nothing we can do. We've lost him." His words hit like a blow to the chest, but as he looks away, there's a glimmer of doubt in Dr. Gomez's eyes. Something about the moment feels unfinished, as though the story isn't over yet. She can't shake the feeling that someone will intervene. Something beyond the limits of their medical expertise, something they could never have predicted. Esther moves through the sterile hallways of the hospital, her worn shoes making soft rhythmic sounds against the cold tile floors. A 50-year-old janitor, she's spent years in this building, unnoticed by most, always cleaning up after others. Yet today, something feels different. The usual hum of hospital life seems quieter, more tense. As she pushes her cart along the corridor, she notices the flurry of activity around the emergency room. Doctors and nurses rush by, their expressions grim, and for a moment, Esther stops, sensing something is wrong. The air is thick with urgency. She instinctively slows her pace, her curiosity piqued by the unspoken tension. She listens, straining to catch a snippet of conversation that drifts from the open doors of the emergency room. "There's nothing more we can do. He won't make it." The words cut through the chaos, sharp and final. Esther's heart skips a beat as she hears the name Richard Ford mentioned, the millionaire, the one who's built an empire. She can hardly believe it. But the sadness in the voices of the doctors, the weight of their words, tells her everything she needs to know. Richard Ford, a man who could buy anything, couldn't buy his way out of death. The thought lingers in her mind. Despite her position in the hospital, Esther has always been an observant woman. She's seen it all, the frantic patients, the stressed doctors, the quiet moments of grief. She's learned to read people's emotions in ways that even some of the most experienced doctors can't. Today, she notices the subtle shifts in the energy of the hospital staff, the way the doctors look at each other with resignation. It's as if they've already accepted that Richard's life is slipping away, and there's no more hope. But Esther doesn't share their certainty. She feels a stirring deep inside her, a pull to do something, anything, to help. Without thinking, Esther steps closer to the emergency room door. Her instincts tell her that she should leave, that she doesn't belong here, but there's something about the situation that won't let her walk away. She hesitates for just a moment, looking at the sterile environment around her, bright lights, polished floors, the smell of antiseptic filling the air, and then she quietly slips inside. The room is a blur of motion. Doctors and nurses move with purpose, yet there's an undeniable sense of defeat hanging in the air. She takes it all in from the doorway, her eyes scanning the scene quickly, and then she sees him, Richard Ford, lying motionless on the operating table. Esther has no formal medical training, and yet something deep inside her stirs. Her grandmother's voice echoes in her mind, recalling the ancient technique she once used to save lives in moments of despair. It wasn't a method taught in any medical school, nor one that anyone else would think of, but Esther remembers it clearly. It's an old remedy, something rooted in intuition and the connection between breath and life. Her grandmother had once told her, when the body cannot breathe, it's the spirit's turn to guide the way. That memory, those words, flood her mind in a rush. Without a second thought, Esther approaches the table. The doctors seem oblivious to her presence, their focus entirely on the monitors and Richard's lifeless form. The tension in the room is almost unbearable, yet Esther moves with a calmness that surprises even herself. She doesn't know exactly why she's doing this, but she feels a deep, inexplicable need to act. She takes a deep breath, steadies herself, and begins. Gently, but firmly, she places her hands on Richard's chest, focusing on his breathing patterns. There's no hesitation in her movements, as though she's done this before. In truth, she hasn't. But her grandmother's lessons, buried in the recesses of her memory, come rushing back. The doctors, still focused on the machines and calculations, don't even notice her at first. But then, as Esther continues with the technique, something changes. The steady beep of the heart monitor, once weak and irregular, begins to stabilize, just slightly at first. It's a small shift, but enough for Esther to feel a flicker of hope. She doesn't speak, doesn't make a sound, but the energy in the room shifts. Dr. Harris, the chief surgeon, glances up, his eyes catching sight of Esther's quiet intervention. For a moment the room is frozen in disbelief. What is she doing here? Who is she to try and save Richard? But before anyone can stop her, the monitor gives another small beep, louder this time, as Richard's heart rate picks up ever so slightly. Esther's hands remain on Richard's chest, her concentration unwavering. The technique she's using is simple, yet powerful, working with his body's natural rhythms, coaxing the breath back into his lungs, one slow, deliberate breath at a time. As the minutes stretch on, the doctors begin to notice. The shift in Richard's condition isn't dramatic, but it's undeniable. Dr. Gomez steps forward, her brow furrowing in confusion. What could this woman, a janitor with no medical training, be doing that they had failed to do? She watches in silence, her disbelief growing as Richard's pulse starts to stabilize, however marginally. Esther doesn't stop though. She continues to focus on Richard, unaware of the eyes now watching her, her heart pounding with every passing second. There's no guarantee that what she's doing will work. She has no medical knowledge to back her actions. But in her heart she knows she can't walk away. Not when a life hangs in the balance. The room grows quieter, as though even the air around them is holding its breath, and just when it seems impossible, Richard's breathing steadies. His chest rises and falls, more evenly now, though still faint. But it's enough. Esther has done what no one else could. She's given him a chance to live. Esther feels the subtle shift in the room before she sees it. The tension, which had once been suffocating, begins to loosen just a little. She doesn't look up immediately, her focus entirely on Richard. The soft rise and fall of his chest, although faint, is enough to let her know that something is changing. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, once irregular and desperate, now steadies slightly. It's not much, but it's a sign, a pulse, a breath. Esther's heart races, but her hands remain steady, knowing that whatever is happening, she's not ready to stop yet. It feels like a miracle, though she never believed in miracles. Just a feeling, an instinct. The connection between life and breath is something primal, something almost forgotten. As the moments pass, Richard's breathing grows a little stronger. Dr. Harris, who had been standing by the table, watches in stunned silence, his sharp eyes flicker from the monitors to Esther's focused hands, then back to Richard. His gaze is filled with disbelief. The monitors had been flashing with hopelessness just minutes ago. How could this be happening? The doctors had done everything they could, yet here in this small moment, something no one could have predicted is unfolding right in front of them. The miracle, if it could be called that, was in the quiet persistence of a woman who had no medical credentials. Esther hadn't just revived Richard's body, she had brought life back where there seemed to be none. Dr. Gomez, still standing at the foot of the operating table, steps forward. Her face is a mixture of awe and confusion. She watches as Richard's chest rises and falls more evenly, the heart monitor's steady beeping, a clear sign of improvement. She had started to lose hope, certain that they had done all they could for him. Yet here she is, witnessing something she couldn't explain. Esther, the quiet janitor, has somehow breathed life into the man who was once beyond saving. Dr. Gomez's mind races, trying to grasp what she's seeing. She knows the body has limits, that death often comes with no warning. But right now, Esther's touch defies every medical principle she's ever learned. "How did you know what to do?" Dr. Gomez finally asks, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of the question. The words seem almost absurd to her, but they come out anyway. She can't help herself. The woman who should be cleaning floors, scrubbing away dirt, has done what the best surgeons could not. Esther, still quietly focused on her task, doesn't immediately respond. She feels the intensity of Dr. Gomez's gaze, but doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. There's no science in her answer, no degree or certification, only intuition. Only a deep-seated understanding that sometimes life knows more than the body can explain. Esther finally speaks, her voice soft and steady. "I didn't know, but I felt it," she says simply. There's no arrogance in her words, no boastfulness, just an unwavering conviction that something inside her guided her to act. She had learned this technique from her grandmother, passed down through generations of women who understood the value of life in a way that couldn't be taught in any classroom. It wasn't about knowledge, it was about connection to the person in front of her, to the air they breathed, to the fragile nature of life itself. Esther hadn't thought twice, she simply followed her gut, and it had worked. The room is silent for a long moment, save for the steady beeping of the monitors. Dr. Harris, who has watched this whole exchange in quiet disbelief, finally steps forward. He's never been one to entertain unproven methods or alternative healing. But this was undeniable. There's a part of him that wants to question everything, to find a logical explanation for what just transpired. But in the face of what's happening, he can only stand there in stunned silence. The man who had been moments away from death is now slowly regaining consciousness. A part of him is grateful, another part is bewildered. No one here can explain it, but no one can deny it either. As Esther continues to monitor Richard's condition, she feels a quiet sense of pride, though she doesn't allow it to show. She's simply doing what she feels is right, following the pull in her chest that won't let her walk away. The doctors exchange looks, still unsure of what exactly they've just witnessed. How could they have missed something so simple, so vital? It's as if they've been so focused on the complexities of modern medicine that they've forgotten the basics, the breath, the heartbeat, the very core of life. Esther's presence in this room has been a reminder of that, of what it means to be truly alive, to truly care for someone, without needing to understand every detail of their medical history. Dr. Gomez, still processing everything, looks at Esther with new eyes. "You saved him," she says quietly, as if speaking the truth aloud will make it real. "You saved his life." It's a statement more than a question, but Esther merely nods, a simple acknowledgement of the strange and wonderful thing that has just occurred. She saved him, yes, but she also reminded everyone in the room of something much deeper, a lesson in the power of human instinct and the unexplainable force that sometimes guides people to do the impossible. For the first time since entering the room, Esther lifts her gaze to the doctors. There's no smugness, no victory in her eyes, just a quiet humility, as though she knows exactly what she did, but also knows that there's nothing extraordinary about it. She didn't do anything special, she just did what needed to be done.
As Richard's breath grows steadier and his color slowly returns, Esther steps back, leaving the doctors to take over. She has done her part. The rest is up to them. Richard slowly opened his eyes, his vision blurry at first. The sterile hospital room around him seemed foreign, as though he was waking from a dream. His body felt weak, fragile, far from the powerful, invincible man he once was. The memory of the operating table flooded his mind, followed by a strange sensation of something more than just medical intervention. He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on Esther, the woman who had, against all odds, brought him back from the brink of death. She was sitting quietly by his bedside, her presence almost calming, but Richard couldn't shake the nagging question that hovered in his mind. How did she know what to do? What did she really know? Do you really know what you were doing? Richard's voice was hoarse, and his words came out more sharply than intended. His skepticism was evident, the millionaire's usual arrogance creeping back in. He had spent his life making decisions based on logic, facts, and expertise, yet here was a woman, a janitor, with no formal medical training, who had somehow brought him back from the edge of death. His pride refused to accept it, but the undeniable truth was that he had been saved by someone who knew nothing about medicine, science, or healing in the conventional sense. His mind couldn't fully reconcile that. Esther didn't flinch at his question. She simply looked at him with the same calm, unwavering gaze she had given him from the beginning. There was no defensiveness in her posture, no desire to prove herself. She smiled gently, as if the question didn't need an elaborate answer. "I didn't know, but I felt something needed to be done," she replied, her voice soft yet steady. "Faith is more powerful than any technical knowledge." Her words hung in the air, not as a challenge to Richard's intellect, but as a quiet reminder that there was more to life than what could be measured, quantified, or explained away by science. Richard frowned, digesting her words with a mixture of confusion and reluctant curiosity. His entire life had been defined by logic, precision, and control. He had built an empire on understanding the world's rules and manipulating them to his advantage. The idea that faith, something so intangible, so unquantifiable, could play a part in saving his life, felt absurd to him. Yet, there was no denying that Esther had done something remarkable. She had given him a second chance when everyone else, including the most skilled surgeons, had given up on him. It wasn't just the technique she used, it was her conviction, her belief that something could be done when all seemed lost. His skepticism didn't wane, but it began to crack, just slightly. Esther had saved him in a way he couldn't understand, and that was both terrifying and fascinating. Richard had always believed in control, in being the one who held the reins. But now, lying in a hospital bed, weak and vulnerable, he was forced to confront something he had never considered before. Maybe he didn't know everything. Maybe there was more to life than what he could see with his sharp, business-savvy eyes. Maybe, just maybe, he had spent too much of his life chasing the wrong things, never stopping to look at what really mattered. Esther's words resonated in his mind as he lay there, trying to piece together the puzzle of his survival. Faith is more powerful than any technical knowledge. It sounded like a cliché, but in the quiet of the hospital room, it felt like a truth that transcended anything Richard had ever known. He wasn't sure he fully understood it, but the seed had been planted. Could it be possible that in his relentless pursuit of wealth and success, he had overlooked the intangible, the unseen forces that govern life itself? Could this woman, who had no degree or fancy title, be teaching him something more valuable than the wealth he had spent a lifetime accumulating? The more Richard thought about it, the more questions emerged. He had spent decades building an empire based on strategies, calculations, and the constant need to control every aspect of his life. But here he was, lying in a hospital bed, having been saved by a woman who believed in something beyond logic. Esther's calmness, her faith in the unknown, had worked where the best surgeons had failed. Was there a lesson in that? Richard couldn't ignore the feeling that he had been living his life with blinders on, focused only on what he could measure and manipulate. Perhaps it was time to open his mind to something more, something beyond the tangible world of business and finance. Esther, sensing the shift in Richard's thoughts, remained silent for a moment before speaking again. Sometimes, the most powerful things in life are the ones we can't see or touch, she said softly. I don't have the answers to everything, but I know this much: you're not meant to live your life just chasing money, Richard. There's more to it. There's a bigger picture. Her words weren't a lecture, but a simple statement of truth. Richard could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a twinge of doubt about everything he had once believed in. Had his relentless pursuit of wealth left him blind to the true purpose of life? Was it possible that Esther, with all her humility, had something to teach him that the world of business never could? As the days passed, Richard found himself questioning the life he had built. He was still recovering, physically weak, but his mind was sharp, more alert than it had been in years. His thoughts kept returning to Esther's words. There's more to life than money. The phrase echoed in his mind, challenging everything he thought he knew. What if she was right? What if his wealth and success had blinded him to the more important things in life? The million-dollar question now was not whether he could recover from his physical ailment, but whether he could recover from the emptiness that had always existed beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. Richard walked out of the hospital with a sense of relief, but also an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. For years, his life had been defined by wealth, power, and status. But as he stepped into the world he had once ruled with confidence, it felt different. The streets, the buildings, the people, everything seemed distant, like a world that no longer fit him. The lessons Esther had imparted, the quiet faith that had saved his life, lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was living a life that no longer aligned with who he had become. The sense of purpose he once felt seemed to have evaporated. Instead of a world of opportunity, it now felt like an endless cycle of chasing something that no longer mattered. As the days passed, Richard found himself reflecting on the choices he had made. He questioned the people he had surrounded himself with, wondering if they truly cared for him or were just there for his money and influence. His relationships, once solid and unquestioned, now felt shallow and transactional. He thought of his employees, his business partners, and even his family. Had he ever truly known them, or had he only seen them through the lens of what they could offer him? The thought disturbed him deeply. The walls he had spent years building around himself, ones that had kept people at a distance, now felt like barriers he couldn't tear down. His success had come at a high price, one that he had never fully understood until now. In the boardroom, Richard tried to return to the grind of his business empire. He surrounded himself with the same familiar faces, gave the same speeches, and made the same deals. But nothing felt the same. The familiar rush of power, the thrill of closing a deal, all felt hollow. The numbers, the contracts, the accolades, none of it excited him anymore. He felt like an actor playing a role, pretending to be the man he used to be. The company, which once brought him so much pride, now felt like a cage, one he had built for himself. The clients he had once viewed as partners now felt like distant figures. His passion for his work had all but vanished, replaced by a profound emptiness. He had spent his life building an empire, but now it seemed to have no purpose.
The weight of his realization grew heavier as the days went on. Richard had always believed that success and wealth were the ultimate goals, that they would bring him happiness and fulfillment. But now he saw the truth in Esther's words. There was more to life than money. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that he had been chasing the wrong things for so long. The mansion, the cars, the luxury, all of it seemed irrelevant. He had lost sight of what truly mattered, and in doing so, he had lost a part of himself. The security that his wealth once provided now felt like a prison. The more he tried to immerse himself in work, the more disconnected he felt from the world around him. At night, when the office was quiet and the city lights flickered outside his window, Richard couldn't escape the growing sense of emptiness that consumed him. He thought of Esther again, her calm demeanor and unwavering faith. She had no wealth, no status, no accolades, but she had something he now realized he lacked: a deeper connection to life. She had understood something that he had spent his whole life ignoring. As he stared out over the city, Richard asked himself, "What's the point of all this? What am I really building?" The answers weren't easy to find. The life he had been living, the one he had worked so hard to maintain, now felt like an illusion, a hollow pursuit of things that would never bring him true happiness. The more he thought about Esther, the more Richard realized that the life he had been leading was based on fear. Fear of failure, fear of being insignificant, fear of not being in control. But that fear had driven him to isolate himself, to push people away, and to focus on his own success at the expense of everything else. Now, as he grappled with the consequences of those choices, he understood that true fulfillment didn't come from control or wealth. It came from connection, from living authentically, and from understanding that life was about more than just achievement. He had been too focused on what he could accumulate, too blind to the simple truths that Esther had shown him. Richard reached a breaking point one evening when he sat in his office, surrounded by the cold glow of his computer screen, and asked himself the question that had been haunting him for weeks. Is this it? Is this all there is? The empty feeling in his chest seemed to grow with each passing moment. The more he tried to force himself back into the role of the powerful CEO, the more it felt like a mask he couldn't wear any longer. The work, the deals, the money, they no longer held any meaning for him. He had spent so many years chasing success, but now he wondered if he had missed the point entirely. The realization hit him hard. He didn't need more success, more money, or more things. He needed more life. In the weeks that followed, Richard made decisions that would have once seemed unthinkable to him. He began to scale back his involvement in the company, delegating more of the day-to-day operations to trusted partners. He started to reconnect with people he had long neglected, family members, old friends, even employees he had once dismissed as unimportant. He spent time with them, listening to their stories, learning from their experiences. Richard had spent so much time in pursuit of power and wealth that he had forgotten the importance of human connection. But now, he was slowly beginning to realize that the real value in life came not from what you had, but from who you had beside you. Richard arrived at the small cafe, a place far removed from the high-rise offices and corporate meetings that had once defined his life. He hadn't seen Esther since the day she had saved him, but the memory of her calm, unwavering presence had stayed with him. There had been something about her that resonated deeply within him, a simplicity he couldn't quite understand, but knew he needed. As he waited for her, he reflected on the transformation he had begun, a shift that was still unfolding, still making him question the very foundation of his existence. The power, the wealth, the control, all of it felt so distant now. He had everything he could have ever wanted, but somehow, none of it had ever felt like enough. When Esther arrived, she greeted him with her usual warmth, her eyes full of quiet understanding. The years of hard living, of struggling to make it, had not hardened her. She still wore the same humble smile, a stark contrast to the polished, calculated facades Richard had spent his life perfecting. As they sat down together, Richard felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't just for the fact that she had saved his life, it was for the deeper lesson she had unknowingly taught him. He owed her more than just his survival. He owed her a new way of seeing the world, a new perspective on what it truly meant to live. "Esther, I don't think I ever properly thanked you for what you did," Richard began, his voice sincere, his words weighed down with meaning. "You didn't just save me physically, you saved me in a way I can't fully explain. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing." He paused, his eyes searching hers for a sign that she understood. For so long he had lived his life as if it were a race, chasing after goals that always seemed just out of reach. Yet, after his experience, he had realized that all that running had only taken him farther from what truly mattered. The things he thought were important, wealth, success, status, had all been hollow. "You've shown me something far more valuable than money," he added, his voice thick with emotion. Esther smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom that had guided her through a lifetime of hardship and simplicity. "True wealth," she said softly, "is knowing when to stop chasing what doesn't matter and start appreciating what truly makes life worthwhile." Her words, simple but profound, hung in the air between them. Richard had heard many versions of this sentiment before, but never with such clarity. The truth in her voice resonated deep within him, stirring something he had buried for years. She wasn't speaking of material wealth or the accumulation of things. She was speaking of a wealth that transcended possessions, an inner wealth rooted in connection, peace and purpose. The more Richard reflected on Esther's words, the more they began to unravel the layers of his life. The money, the success, the constant need to be on top, all of it had been a distraction. For years he had used his wealth as a shield, a way to control his environment and protect himself from vulnerability. But in doing so he had neglected the things that really mattered: love, kindness and the simple joys of life. He realized, in that moment, that he had been looking at wealth all wrong. True wealth was not about the numbers in his bank account or the size of his house. It was about the connections he made, the impact he had on others, and the peace he found within himself. It was a concept he had never fully grasped until now. Richard spent the following weeks re-evaluating every part of his life. His business dealings, once the center of his existence, now felt secondary to the deeper purpose he was beginning to embrace. He knew he could never walk away from everything. His wealth had given him the platform to make a difference, but he could no longer let it define him. He started by shifting his focus from profit to people. He began seeking out causes that mattered, organizations that worked to address social inequality, provide for the homeless, and protect the environment. For the first time in his life, Richard felt like he was investing in something that truly had value. This was wealth that could change lives, not just his own but the lives of others who needed it most. As Richard immersed himself in philanthropy, he found a deep sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in the corporate world. He traveled to impoverished areas, met with communities struggling to survive, and used his resources to help create sustainable solutions. The work was difficult, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Every day, he saw how a small amount of wealth could make a significant impact when directed toward the right causes. It was a feeling he had never known, a sense of purpose that no business deal or luxury item could provide. He wasn't just building his empire anymore, he was helping build a better world, and in doing so, he was discovering a richness that went far beyond material wealth. The more time Richard spent giving back, the more he realized how disconnected he had been from the real world for so long. The corporate deals, the endless meetings, the pursuit of more, it had all kept him in a bubble, isolated from the true needs of the people around him. He began to forge new relationships, not based on contracts or mutual gain, but on shared values and goals. He found himself drawn to people who cared about making a difference, not just about climbing the social ladder. Richard started to realize that the life he had been living was one of illusion, but the life he was building now was grounded in something much more powerful: human connection and a desire to create lasting change. One evening, Richard stood at the edge of a small village he had helped support, watching as a group of children played in the dirt, their laughter ringing through the air. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. The road he had taken to get here hadn't been easy. He had lost many of the old comforts he once valued, but he had gained something far more valuable. He had gained a sense of purpose, a real wealth that could never be measured in dollars. As he turned to walk back to the group, he smiled, understanding now that the most valuable currency in life was not money, but the ability to make a difference. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Ford felt truly rich. Richard's transformation had been profound, not just in his actions, but in the way he viewed the world around him. He no longer saw life through the lens of success or failure, but through the lens of connection, humility, and purpose. The wealth he had once chased, the power he had once craved, all seemed insignificant now. What truly mattered were the bonds he created with others, the impact he made in their lives, and the meaning he derived from every moment spent in pursuit of something greater than himself. Each day, Richard found himself more attuned to the world around him, less focused on the things that once consumed him, and more focused on the people who made life worthwhile. Every week, Richard made it a point to visit Esther. At first, his visits were simple gestures of gratitude. "Thank you for saving my life, for showing me the way," but over time they became something deeper. Esther was no longer just the woman who had saved him in an emergency room. She was a mentor, a guide, and a friend. With her quiet wisdom and unassuming presence, she had opened Richard's eyes to a world he had long ignored. As he sat with her, listening to her thoughts on life, on the importance of kindness, and on the power of selflessness, Richard felt a growing sense of reverence for her. She had given him the most valuable gift of all: perspective. Esther's life had been simple, marked by the daily grind of cleaning, yet her heart had always been rich in compassion. Richard had once believed that only those with wealth and status could offer valuable insight into life. But now, he understood that the greatest lessons often come from the most unexpected places. It was the quiet, humble people like Esther who had the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize the deeper currents of life. He had spent so many years listening to experts and corporate moguls, but none of them had ever spoken to him in the way Esther did. Her words weren't about money or success, they were about what truly mattered: love, faith, and human connection. As Richard continued to reflect on his life, he realized how much he had taken for granted. He had spent decades chasing after fleeting goals, building an empire that in the end had left him feeling more empty than fulfilled. It was only after nearly losing his life that he truly understood the fleeting nature of wealth and the eternal value of relationships. Esther had reminded him that it was the people around him, the ones he loved, the ones he helped, that would give his life meaning.
In her quiet way, she had shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the richness of human experiences, the connections we share, and the kindness we give. On one of his visits, Richard sat with Esther on a park bench, the soft rustling of the trees and the distant laughter of children filling the air. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. The frantic pace of his previous life, the endless chase for more, seemed so distant now. The world felt slower, more deliberate, as if he had finally found his place within it. Sitting beside Esther, watching the simple beauty of the world unfold around them, Richard felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life, and with it, the clarity to understand what really mattered. It was moments like this, moments of quiet reflection and genuine connection, that made life truly meaningful. As the camera slowly pulled away, capturing the image of Richard and Esther sitting together, lost in conversation, it became clear that this was the culmination of his journey. This was the moment where everything had come full circle. Richard had gone from a man obsessed with wealth to a man who understood that the true riches in life were found not in material success, but in the relationships we nurture, the kindness we show, and the love we give. He had once thought that money could buy happiness, but now he knew that it was the people in his life who brought him true joy. The real wealth, he realized, was the ability to connect with others and to make a meaningful difference in their lives. The camera continued to pull back, the image of Richard and Esther fading into the background as the park became a symbol of the life Richard had come to embrace. It was a life of simplicity, of meaningful connections, and of an understanding that true wealth is not measured by the things we own, but by the love we share. As the scene faded to black, Richard's story had come full circle, from a man lost in the pursuit of material wealth to a man who had found the real treasures of life, purpose, connection, and love. The lesson was clear: the best things in life cannot be bought, they must be lived, shared, and cherished. Richard no longer felt the need to prove himself. He didn't need to chase the next big deal or acquire more property. Instead, he focused on the things that mattered most, spending time with those he cared about, giving back to the community, and living a life filled with meaning. He knew there would always be challenges, but now he faced them with a sense of calm and clarity that had been missing for most of his life. Esther had shown him the way, and as he moved forward, he carried her wisdom with him. He knew that no matter what came next, the real measure of his life would not be in the balance of his bank account, but in the love he gave and received. As Richard stood up to leave the park bench, he turned to Esther one last time, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than he had ever intended. "For everything." Esther smiled, her gentle eyes meeting his, and nodded. "You've always had it in you, Richard," she said. "I just helped you see it." With that, Richard walked away, his heart lighter than it had ever been, knowing that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the people who make life worth living.